Welcome to Beyond Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Petralis, and we are super excited for today's guest. I'll be totally honest with you. If we didn't have our 150th episode that John and I did is kind of like a summary of what's been going on with our half year or year, this guy right here would have been episode 150 for us. So one of my best friends in the entire world here. And, we talk on this podcast a lot with athletes, and we talk about persistence and goal setting and pushing yourself. And, athletes and coaches give a lot of advice on this podcast at the end of it to younger versions of themselves or kids who were in their situations or were in their situations. And it's great. And I think today, kind of that lesson is going to be learned here is this is a guy who, kind of had a goal and a dream and some of us like myself, we do it a little bit later in life than most people. And I'm really proud of this guy, and he kind of did something really cool. And I wanted to have him on here today because I think the message is great. And he's also one of the funniest people I know. So it's kind of like double whammy here. We got in a good way. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve Cronin, one of my best friends in the whole world. What's up, buddy?
Hey, Anthony. I'm psyched to be here. Thanks so much for having me on the Beyond podcast. I'm obviously a huge fan of yours, and thanks for taking the risk. I think this is a little outside the strike zone of Beyond's usual guests here, but I'm psyched to be here. I'm psyched to have this conversation.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we do have I feel like we've had like 4 or 5 episodes that do not pertain to maybe the genre that we cover per se, but are
Right.
just like really great stories or someone cool that I want to have on or
Yeah.
something like this, and kind of being able to share your story a little bit today of something you've just done and something you have coming up too, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So let's jump into it. Runes, man. You went you had a
Sure.
goal of kind of writing a comic. You're one of the biggest comic book fans I know. For you people out there, any Marvel comic movie that comes out, the day that it comes out, I know that this guy is going to see it. He's read the comic like 10
That's right.
times already, but he is there day one, and he is in our group chat. The guy we go, "Hey Steve, what did you think?" Hey Steve, like, because he knows comics so well, and he's read so many, and he's just so on point when he talks to us. I'm always so intrigued. So talk about it, man. I kind of dropped the bomb here, but I want you to explain a little bit what you wrote and what it is.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. And I also have to give a shout out to our friend Drew. Me and my buddy Drew are I'm really he's really my mentor in terms of comic book collecting. I think I know my stuff, and I do, but I am just the Padawan under Drew's Jedi. That's a Star Wars reference for the athletes listening to the podcast now, but yeah, man, it's so it was kind of a long journey. It was just a couple years ago. It was kind of mid pandemic. I had come to trying to support my local comic shops by ordering a lot of stuff online. And then a lot of comic shops had some kind of walk up drop offs. Like you could order some stuff from the shop, and they would kind of meet you, and they would kind of leave it on a table outside. And that's how I collected comics during the pandemic. So kind of thinking about like my love for comics, I always wanted to try and contribute something, just to be a tiny part of this kind of world that I love, that I love so much and that I've loved since I was a kid. And is it like sort of a silly hobby? Sure, sure,
Everyone
but
has a silly hobby, dude.
right, right.
Everybody has one.
But
Everybody.
now I feel like in the last we've had 20 years of pretty great movies, and I think me and a few other people are like, see, like,
Right?
told you,
These
like this
aren't
stuff
that
is great.
nerdy. This is not
Right.
like right. Like, yeah.
Right. This stuff was great. So, with highs and lows, for Marvel, and for DC for that matter over the years. But anyway, so yeah, started, with the goal, to set out and write and produce my own comic book. And again, just to be that tiny part of it, my goal was always to hold my comic book in my hands. I just wanted to get like very specific about that goal and just to see it on a shelf, to see it on a shelf somewhere. Like, ever since I was a kid, like, there's your kind of ongoing titles, the stuff you love, the stuff that you follow. But even just going in and checking out something new, I think that's one of the great things about comics is, you can be a true blue fan or somebody who's like just getting into it, walk into your local comic shop there's something new and exciting for you.
I mean, and So let me ask you just like a funny question at the beginning of something you said. I thought I was like, oh, I gotta ask him. How many comic books are you getting in a year? And how many were you getting during the pandemic in the sense of like, I just want to put it out there to people to make people understand when we say like everyone says they're a fan of something, but there's a difference between being a fan of something and like really being a fan of something. And I think you're kind of
Yeah,
that
it's
person.
hard to yeah, it's kind of hard to estimate. I would say so. Let me do monthly,
I was just
and
gonna
I would
say,
say
give me a month.
yeah, because the year kind of comes and goes. Month, probably some titles, are monthly. They come out once a month. Some titles are like every 2 weeks. That's like a typical kind of schedule. But probably by the end of a month, if I walk into my comic shop, and comic books come out on Wednesdays, so that's typically 4 Wednesdays in a month where you can walk into the shop. I am probably walking out of there with between like I would say like 5 and 8 comics per month.
Yeah, I
And
mean, that's
that's
no joke, dude. That's no joke. I mean, and
it
are
is
you
it
reading
is
those pretty quickly?
I tried to read them day of. Yeah, I like to read
All
them
of
day
them?
of. Yeah, most of them. Yep,
Damn, damn. Okay.
yeah, most of them. Well, it's just there's something about comics too that because they come out every Wednesday and because there's like storylines coming out, there's always something recent. There's always
Yeah.
something kind of new. Like, there are a lot of podcasts out there are daily. I know people like to consume that stuff. I have to be honest, some of them I save.
Yeah.
There's just a great storyline in Amazing Spider-Man that just wrapped up, and I knew it was the conclusion to the storyline, so I'm like, I'm saving this one.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
because I was excited. I wanted to save it for to fend off the Sunday scaries to read it and to see how the storyline wrapped up. So yeah, it's on a monthly basis. Yeah, I'd say like between 5 and 8 is about the average. But then too, I always like I said, trying new stuff is so important. So you could throw in there like a new trade paperback, which is like a collection of comics in a story, or if a new title comes out or an existing title gets a new creative team, that's always fun. If a title that, a character maybe you've heard of gets a new writer, new artist, new colorist, new editor, that could take, that could take a well-known character in a totally different direction. So it's always worth kind of dipping your toe in something new.
Wow. So, I mean, let's just hit the lower end of that. So let's say five a month. That's 60 comic books a year, and then you're adding in what you kind of just said. Like,
One-offs. Mhm.
right, so wow, man. So yeah, you put the work in. So that's just for the audience out there to understand, like, kind of the passion behind it and the love behind it. I mean, something I want to talk to you a little bit about again, like you kind of mentioned at the top, like, different type of guests that I have on, but to me, it's all the same message. I think when you
Mm.
want something, you go and get it. Like, so that pertains to sport, life, work,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Um, talk about the persistence because you mentioned 2020, like that's when this podcast started. I'm sure 7 zillion podcasts started all that time, right? But like
Sure. Right.
people did begin to pursue their passions in all different avenues. But for you, I'm sure putting a comic together, and we'll obviously talk about it, but telling a story and how you want that story to go, and maybe having the visual in your head of what that looks like,
Yeah.
that's not easy. And I'm sure there's days that you were just like, I'm done. Or I'm sure there were
Oh
days
yeah.
that you would just like, is this worth like there were those negative thoughts or those things seeping in about really going through and finishing this. Talk about persistence, I guess, in the process of doing this, because it must be great.
Yeah. So, and it did feel a lot like training for a sport. At a lot of different times. With Runes, the comic, that I have out now in some Boston area stores. And I'm working on kind of continuing that story. I sort of just sat down with a notebook and just kind of came up with some ideas of what I sort of wanted it to feel like. I wrote down some TV shows that I like, some cartoons that I like, that I liked from when I was a kid.
Okay,
Some
so this wasn't like you always had a vision. This was something you would just
Oh,
kind of like,
right,
I want to
yep,
put
correct, yeah,
together based off. Okay, so this was okay,
yeah,
great,
yeah.
great. Okay.
But I also want to encourage people to do that. If you have this idea for a movie or a short story or whatever it is, what I want to stress to anybody listening is just make that blank page disappear. And one thing I did that is a kind of a productivity hack that I stole from a college friend of mine is anytime he has to do something that he doesn't really want to get started on, he'll sit down and set a timer on his iPhone for 20 minutes. And then he goes, when that timer's up, then I'm done. So it's just 20 minutes to do it. I started doing that with writing and I blew by the 20 minutes every time. Sometimes I didn't even hear the alarm go off because that's how hard it is to get started.
Yeah.
It's, for any athletes out there, look, it is just that when that alarm goes off for that 6 a.m. workout, that's a problem. That's the hardest thing you're going to do is hit that 6 a.m. alarm and not hit the snooze, and not get back to bed. The first thing is to just kind of put your feet on the floor, you know. So I had been thinking about a few ideas, been tinkering around with kind of a few ideas, and then I started to sit down with a notebook, and just wrote down a few things that I wanted it to feel like, that I wanted the comic to just have a certain tone to it. Now,
Can I take a shot at something? I
sure.
read it. I read it a couple of times, and you
Oh, great.
just said that. So
Thanks.
if you say something, I'm gonna be like, God damn it, I wish I said that before he did. Because as I read it, I got vibes of a couple different things. One, I got vibes at the very kind of beginning, like almost kind of like this like Mission Impossible meets like Jurassic Park meets like this
Sure.
transformation of werewolf or all along kind of like that, almost not saying like a Twilight thing, but like that's kind of like I felt like, man,
Yeah.
this is kind of a cool story. What are these people going to do? What is it that they're going to run into? And then to kind of see what
Yeah.
happens at night, and then what the result, like it's very interesting. And to me, like it's you left the door wide open for
Yeah. I hope so. Mhm.
so
Yeah.
am I anywhere near that as far as
Yeah, yeah, dude.
information
I think
goes?
I think you're spot on in terms of kind of source material and just like how I wanted it to feel like. I describe it like a short blurb for it is Indiana Jones meets Disney's Gargoyles. Now,
Okay.
Gargoyles is probably too old for some of our listeners here. That was probably too long ago. But before you could tap on your device and watch literally whatever you wanted, you had to race home from school to catch cartoons that were on at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. And Gargoyles was one of these TV shows that I
Yeah.
thought did a good job. I liked it as a kid because it was science versus magic,
Right.
and sometimes those things kind of came together. So those were the vibes I was going for. But in terms of what you said, right, like Mission Impossible, Jurassic Park,
Yeah.
these big fantastical things where a group of people who are, and I love this idea. This idea is in so many stories and movies, these people are competent, right? Like they know what they're doing. They're
Yeah.
scientists, but they're thrown into a situation they couldn't possibly imagine,
Yeah.
and then how do they act. And something that I think too, and well, now you have me talking about all like the creative stuff that I like,
I love it.
but something that I think that horror movies do really well is whatever the situation and whatever your job is, if you can keep your head and you can not panic and you can be good hearted, then you can beat the horror movie. Then you live through the horror movie. You know, there's so
Yeah.
so many good horror movies or horror movies that I love are can you solve the mystery? And so I just love that dynamic of people who are competent, good at their jobs, thrown into like this crazy kind of magic situation, and then their wits are put to the test.
Yeah, I loved it, dude. I tell you, I read it. You came by my house, and I remember you gave me like a
Yeah,
first copy, and
the first
I
copy at
read it.
Fox.
I read it that night, or I might have read it the next morning. I forget, but I read it fairly quick. And then I reread it right when your pop-up, like which we'll talk about later, your pop-up event. I kind of reread
Yeah.
it a second time, and then I reread it before we came on the podcast today, just to kind of,
Oh, great.
sometimes like when you watch a movie and you, after like the second or third time of watching, and you notice something or see
Sure.
something or hear something, you're like, oh my God, like I never noticed that before or heard that before.
Yeah.
So that was always kind of me was really reading it the third time to kind of give you a guess in the creative side of where maybe the motivation came from, because I thought it was great, man. I was really proud of you, and I was like, just like
Thanks.
uh, all of it. But I want to get into more funnier side of it, and obviously you can go as funny as you want to on it. But I'm sure a big thing, and I'm not trying to use like the letter P's here. I just said persistent, but now I'm going to say patience because I know
Yeah.
for me, the one thing with this podcast is like, and John joked about it on our 100th episode, is like hitting the
Right.
gas pedal and going. And like
Yeah.
for you, like I know the type of dude you are because this is why we're friends. Like people usually are similar to each other. Like when you kind of set yourself to do something, you want to get it done, and you're like
Yeah.
going like gas pedal down to get it done. But in this process, it's not like you being able to make this all on your own. You got to
Right.
depend on artists, and you got to depend on people that are
A
helping you
whole
through
team.
this
A whole
process.
team.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to insult any of these people, but I'm sure they're getting that from all different angles and they want certain
Yeah.
money up front. I mean, for you, talk about this process of like beginning to put this dream now together. Like you kind of have this vision, you kind of know what you want to do, but now you're relying on other people a little bit. I mean, how does that work when you reach out to an illustrator and say, "Hey, I got an idea. This is my vision." Like, how does that
Yeah.
process work?
Well, I learned a lot about the process because, especially this being my first time around, and I think something that I had to learn going through was when you do a creative venture like this, or even if you're in kind of a position sport, right? And you have to rely on somebody who performs a totally different function. Performs a totally different function than you. um, you have to learn to kind of let things happen sort of all on their own. And you sort of have to give people the time that they need to develop something good,
Mhm.
because the last thing that anybody wants is to rush something and have it not be what you want. Have it
Mhm.
not be what you want. A mistake I made early on in the process um, was I approached the development and the timeline and the completion like a corporate scenario. I have a success. If I do say so myself, I have a very successful day job that I enjoy and that I'm good at. And so I first approached this with like, okay, development phase, like this date to this date. Okay, the next this date to this date, and then we'll have final files, with all this stuff at this date. And a
Mhm.
couple people along the way just sort of took a moment to be like, Steve, that's not how this is going to happen at all. That's just not like, it's just not like, we appreciate that, we get what you're doing here, but like that's just not how this is going to happen. So
And
you
that's
do
tough,
have
dude. And that's tough when
it's hard.
you're so used to kind of, I like, I get it. Like, you're so used to getting things done in a certain way. And now you're in a process that you are just kind of like sitting back and like
Yeah.
waiting, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It was tough to get past the writing phase and to look at the manuscript, just the typed pages, and be like, this is as good as I could get it. And I
Mhm.
think that's as good as it gets for that, for a writer for that stage in the process, especially my first project. That was as good as it was going to get for me, because I looked at the thing, and I looked at the draft and just said, everything that I want is in here. Everything makes sense. Everything that I set up in the first third gets paid off by the last third. I set up what I want to set up for for more issues, but it's also a self-contained issue and a good story, a good single issue on its own. There's really nothing more I can do here. So it's hard, and it is humbling too to say, okay, now we're moving forward, but I don't have a say over what gets done next. And also too, we talked about this briefly, but it's important too, and maybe there's some athletes out there like at a certain point in their career, or a coach out there that's at a certain point in their career that could sympathize with this. Is in independent publishing, it's just nobody's first gig. It just, we're all doing this, and because because we love it. And I think that's what I focused on at the end of the day, is that even when it took some unexpected turns, even when it hit some obstacles, even when I heard we might be done soon, and like it wasn't so soon, I just fell back on like, I'm making a con.
Mhm.
Like I'm making a comic. Like I love that. I'm going to love this. But it was kind of a humbling lesson in a type of process that I didn't have a say over the whole thing end to end. And it was humbling to be like, that's not how it works, you know?
Yeah. And that's what's tough. I mean, I even remember with this, like early on when I was so limited technologically, like I didn't
Yeah.
really know much, you know, and I was dependent on people helping me create social media, and I was dependent on helping people help me edit videos or try to post something. And I got to the point that that process got so slow that I just learned how to do everything by myself. And I know
Yeah, that's
you
great.
you can't necessarily do that, but the idea of the fact that like sometimes people with Beyond, I've always learned to just enjoy the process because there've been so many other
Yeah.
scenarios in my life that when something happens for the first time, you are so stressed out about it that you never do get to sit back, relax, and enjoy that process, you know? So,
Yeah.
I'm sure the next time it comes around, which it will, you understand this process a lot more. There is going to be a lot less stressors and so on for it.
Yeah.
Which is great, you know, which is great, but when you go through something for the first time, man, it is scary, scary, scary. Now,
Yeah.
and you don't have to share the exact dollar amounts, but, like, when you're like, "Here's the idea, I need you to start
Mhm.
getting the work," like, what does that look like? What does, like, an illustrator look for upfront? What did some of these people kinda look for upfront a little bit? Just so this audience has an idea of, like, the
Sure.
financial aspect behind it too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I won't talk numbers, at the moment, but I will
Yeah.
say this first comic was financed by myself, by me, with my wife's expressed permission. It was with the dollar amount that I saw. I was just like, well, I need to ask my wife about this.
Yeah.
That's how I'll tell you that's how much it was. It was not
Yeah.
an amount I was comfortable spending without checking in with my wife first. But I worked early on and was referred to a great organization called comicsexperience.com. I encourage any fan of movie or sci-fi or anything to check out comicsexperience.com. They have a lot of resources on their site for people who are fans or people who are getting started, and they're a great site. And they're also kind of a one-stop shop for creators. So they did kind of hook me up and I reviewed people's work and got to make some decisions along the way. But they hooked me up with the creative team. They hooked me up with a project manager, an illustrator, an artist who wrote, did sketches and then eventually inks for things to look, really sharp and black and white. A colorist that was really important, to set like the right tone for everything. A letterer, somebody who fills in the word bubbles,
Wow.
and then part of the process that I really appreciated, an editor who went through. And my only concern here with the editor was I just felt with my manuscript the things that the characters were doing were so planned out by me. I was worried that an editor was going to come in and be like, well, why is this person saying this and why is this person saying that, and they didn't, which was really great. They made just some kind of style changes and just some things to make the whole book consistent within itself, which is just professional. It just made it. I had a great couple emails with this editor, and I thought the overall team did a great job. But I was just most like pleasantly surprised by the editing stage.
Yeah. I mean, and for people to also understand, while Steve is kind of pursuing this goal and doing this, he is also at this point neck deep in marriage plans. Steve got married during
I
this
did, yeah,
process
during the
too.
comic, yeah,
And so while this was all going on, he's also putting a wedding together and the stresses of that. I was honored to be a part of that wedding, and it was beautiful. So it's not an easy, a beautiful thing is not easy to put together when it's um when it's awesome, so
yeah,
yeah. So that for people to understand too, when we talk about the persistency and we talk about the patience of that, like there was a lot going on in your life, like regardless of whether you looked at it like that or not, when there's
yeah,
added stresses and arguably at this point the biggest day of your life, while you're
oh
also
yeah,
pursuing a passion and a dream, while you also have a full-time job, like there's just a lot of things that you're juggling. So to kind of
yeah.
be in this process for the first time as well, that's a clap of the hands to you, my friend.
Yeah, no, thanks, man. And I think it's just, it's something that I've heard on this podcast a lot too, that I think people will really relate to is lots of pressure, you know, lots of pressure turns coal into a diamond.
Yeah.
You can decide to use it like that. And it was definitely a stressful time when I was kind of mid in the development phase, mid in the production phase, and also trying to decide what appetizers to serve, a cocktail hour, that was going on. That a lot of that was going on. But I
Right.
think, in the Beyond podcast, I bet you found ways to make time for this, even if it was like on my commute or something. My advice to anybody is just keep that notebook handy. You know, you'll get an idea on the train while you're waiting at the DMV, while you're waiting at the doctor's office for something that will really work, and you want to just make sure you jot it down and kind of do it later. I'm sure you're the same thing, dude. But my phone has like a million little notes in the notes section,
Yeah.
like like literally hundreds. Now most of them don't make sense because I tried. I like got this idea and put it in like while I'm at a red light or something, and then like 2 weeks later, I look at it. And I was like, "Whoa, this doesn't make any sense at all,"
Yeah,
But like
yeah.
every now and then, something will pop into your head while you're doing something else. That's like, oh, perfect. That would be exactly right for page 6, panel 3. That would be exactly right. Like let's do that. Or whether it's like a play or like a team dynamic or something you need to fix in your game, or something to do for a podcast. Once you get going on a project, and that's why I can't stress enough for people with ideas, like, if you do have something creative, just make that white page disappear. Just
Mhm.
get that first 20 minutes of writing down, because once you do that, now your brain's firing. Now your brain is looking for connections, looking for threads, looking for stuff, and it gets easier the more you train that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great way of putting it, it's funny the ideas that kinda come to your mind a little bit when you're, like you said, sitting at a red light or, um, just in traffic or just sitting at home or you're watching a TV or you're listening to a podcast, like, there are so many great ideas that we've had here that have been born from silly
Mm,
moments or, like, moments that you just, like, kinda out of nowhere, and I get that, and as far as the pockets of time go, it is important to find them. I mean, I say this to like when people ask me their advice about starting a podcast in general,
yeah,
I say
right.
to them like the success of your podcast is like what you do with those extra minutes you have alone a day. Like
Yeah, yeah,
I take
yep,
advantage of my alone moments, and
yep,
some days I have way more of it than others. But what do I do with those alone moments? And and all my alone moments doesn't mean I'm working. Sometimes my alone moments is talking to you on the phone or talking to Tommy on the phone or
yeah,
dealing with work stuff or editing, like, and then working and doing some editing on my phone or just going on and being human too. But though when you gotta get things done or you know that you have a really good idea, it's like, what do you do with those moments that you have for yourself? Like, and how
yeah,
much are you willing to put into it? And I think that that's kind of when we talk about you utilized every minute of your life at that point into that you could into this or
yeah.
what you had left over with all the things going on.
And I think you have to start believing in the cumulative effect of that. There's a great YouTube video that I've watched, 100 times, where the late great Kobe Bryant is talking about his workout routine and why he works out he's in the gym at 5 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, because that's because practice starts at 9.
Right,
So I every day I get 4 hours extra practice on everybody else. Now you take that out over a year, I'm
right.
blowing everybody away. You take that out over 2 years, I'm blowing everybody away. You take that out over 5 years, I've gotten so much more practice than everybody else. And that's something I think I think people at that, like, elite level really start to understand. They start to believe in the power of chipping away, and it's not just getting a little bit done, it's just kind of training yourself to be that 1% better, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that it's like kinda loose change, right? Like, after a while, you collect loose
Yeah,
change, you got a lot of money, so it's like when you can win those little moments and get something out of it, those little moments just, like, continue to add up and give you a big break or a big thing somewhere. Many
yeah,
people, just so you know, when Steve says that that this is a kind of a different type of guest or different type of genre, there is something you should know about the two of us. We were both captains of our track team in high
That's
school
right.
as juniors and seniors.
It's a big deal.
And it
It was
was
a
a
big
big deal
deal
because
for
lacrosse wasn't a
juniors.
sport at our high school.
That's
It
right.
was really just baseball and track. So like our track team was really good because we had some good athletes on there and
Yeah,
people
a lot of people.
but you and I led that squad. I mean, arguably the best back-to-back years they ever had. So yeah, like from a super young age, I mean, I'm being like half serious here, but from like a super young age, like I knew that about you. Like I knew that you were just like if your mind was set on a 4 minute mile, dude, you were doing everything in your power to get a 4 minute mile, like or 5 minute mile. Sorry, high school five
Well,
minute
yeah,
mile. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say a 4 minute mile in high school would be
Sorry, no, but a
is it
5 minute mile was like
I
I
should
remember
I
that
don't I
this
don't even think like high school kids are doing that. Like there might
no,
be like
no,
10 high
no.
school kids
I
in the
messed up.
country
I
with
messed up. 4 minute
I
mile
was
is
gonna
just
say, all
insane.
right, yeah, yeah. I don't want people to like
But I am right about 500, right?
I hit like five on the dot by senior year, a long
But
time ago.
this is what I'm trying to get at with Steve. I remember so vividly like how mad he would get when he got like 502 or
Oh
505
yeah, a
or
lot of those.
like
Yep.
at the finish line like he might have finished second in the race. He might even won the race. But if he was so mad and he was so determined, like 5 minutes and like in practice, he like Steve hustled, he worked hard. Like that's why he was a leader as a junior. Like that work ethic and so on, like as you're kind of talking about this, like I see this in this process. Like there are so many consistencies that you're saying that like coaches and athletes alike like need to understand. Like when you're an athlete like football, you're putting the work in the weight room, you're putting the work in sevens, you're putting the work in on your own. But when you're on the field, you're dependent on 10 other people to do a job. You're dependent on
Yeah.
a coach and staff to be prepared and vice versa. Like you as a coach and staff put a game plan together over the weekend, and on Monday morning you are giving the game plan out and you are walking through it, and then Tuesday you are gung ho, or some programs are gung ho from jump. So you are so
Yeah.
dependent on other people to be on top of their game. That process can be frustrating when other people don't know. Like when I
Yeah.
played, if someone didn't know a coverage or know what to do, it's like blow my mind that we went through the entire week and you never asked a question of like where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. And I think when you
Yeah.
talked about this process today, like you're saying that like you're like I was dependent on this and dependent on that, and people kind of sat me
Yep.
down and said, yeah, this is the way it's not going to be, and like you got to kind of pump the brakes a little bit, but you're still persistent in what you're doing because you want to get things done.
Yep.
So even though that might have been their process, I'm sure you were poking away wherever you could to like make
Yeah.
sure that things were still getting done and people were still staying on there what they were saying, and deadlines they
Yeah.
gave you were following up on. I mean, that's like when I say sports relates to life, dude, this, like in this podcast a million times, like you are the prime example of it. Like you have taken that work ethic that you learned at such a young age and you've brought it to yourself into your life to finally be like, I'm going after this dream of something that I want to do. And you already have the foundation because you played sports and you did that work
Yeah.
when you were so young. Like, sorry to go on a soapbox here, but I'm like listening to you and how passionate you are and you saying this stuff, and I'm just like, man, dude, like this message is great, and like, I
Yeah.
just want you to hear that out loud a little bit, you know?
Yeah, yeah, and so I was willing to bet that our storied career as junior captains of the track team was going to come up, and it did. It came up like I think after the 20-minute mark. I took under 20 minutes on when that was going to come up, but it came at the over, dude. But so I was thinking about it, and something that is part of this process too. And Anthony, what you brought to this kind of track team, because the track team at the high school is a lot of different parts. There's throwers, there's distance runners, there's sprinters, and they don't really work out together. But something that was like really present in my comic book writing process, and that you installed in a really large team, was we started to be rooting for other people's success. And that's something that wasn't there like before you got there. But to like watch a sophomore take over a practice one day, or sometimes as captains we would pick a couple freshmen and say, you guys are leading stretches today, get us through it, make sure nobody's messing around, make sure everybody does it. And that like rooting for the success of others around you, I think is such an important lesson too, because it helps you depend on other people, and then it helps the whole thing move forward. So even though, like, there were parts in this process that I was, frustrated with it at times, and things were taking a little longer than I hoped, I just kind of thought to myself, I just went back to that same thought of, I'm making a comic, and this is my creative team, and comics are very rarely, there's a few extremely talented individuals out there who write, draw, color, ink, and edit their own books, and those people are amazing, and I have most of their stuff stacked up in my office right now because it's like incredible work, because it's incredible work, but that's incredibly rare. So it was like, just to hear you talk about the process, I think I was coached by a lot of others in this process, like kind of throughout the time. I was coached by people on Reddit. There's a lot of great like Reddit forums, and I would type in and be like, "Hey, this is happening with my comic right now. Is this typical? Could people weigh in?" And people I've never met on Reddit were like, "Yeah, it sounds about right. Like it's really frustrating. Like at the time." I'm going to like a separate Comic Con this weekend, actually, and I went to that Reddit board and I said, "Hey, is it cool to like hand out my indie comic at cons?" And people were like, "Oh yeah," like people were giving me advice on that. But so I just in terms of that like kind of team dynamic, and are you really invested in other people succeeding, in the team success, that I think was really present in this process. Is just started to think about it is like, okay, if this part of the process is taking too long, that's somebody like taking a break, and that's my break. Like that, they deserve that. I took breaks in the writing process, so it's fair. It's only fair that they take breaks too. So that mentality that you brought to our track team, so long ago, is such an important project mentality. Whether you're trying to get a win, whether you're trying to make the playoffs, whether you're trying to make a winning team, turn a team into a winner, whether you're trying to get a play off the ground and you're having really bad rehearsals. I've been part of those too, where you're in like your third full dress rehearsal. It's taken 6 hours, and the whole cast is looking at each other, and they're just like, "We got to get out of here. This is going to be bad." But then, like, you get past that, and you start to root for each other's success, and it moves the whole thing forward.
And I appreciate that. That means a lot, actually. That's like a big thing of me. Like I'm everyone's biggest cheerleader, because I think
Yeah,
when anybody has an idea or wants to run with something, so many people always go to like, well, what about this? And what about that? And what about that? And sometimes when people come to you with stuff, they don't want to hear that. They want to hear like, that's great. That's awesome. What are you going to do? What's the next step? Like, because everybody wants validation or wants to feel supported in a way. And I think that that's a quality that people should have. People should be, and I think it's a
yeah,
very important quality to have sometimes because all small things become big because there's other people around that like help that process for people to get where they need to go. And you hit the nail on the head. It's like Spider-Man, like 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 coming together, and that's what's like really important. And I think that that's something about you as well. Not that we're going on a I love you, you love me here thing, but that's just that's you. Now, to jump into something a little funnier and a little bit
yeah.
more so on. I mean, I shouldn't say funnier. I'm more serious, I guess I should say. Completely different words here.
Okay. The
What was that
opposite. Okay.
moment
Yeah.
like now for me, for example, I'll give you a moment so you can like understand what I'm asking here. When I got the head coaching job at AC, there was a moment that I
Yeah.
kind of had that like I went back in the car for a minute and collected myself, a little emotional, a
Yeah.
little
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of like whatever, and then you boom, you kind of go. What was that moment like for you when you like saw this? Like you picked
Yeah.
this up and you were like, man, I did it. I set a goal out. The process was up and down. It was difficult, but I got to where I needed to get to. And here it is in my hand. Talk about that moment.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's really great. It's really great to set a very specific goal and then just to have it come to fruition. I think I tell people all the time. When I first sat down to write a comic, I said to myself, "This is going to be great. This is
Mhm.
going to be better than Watchmen. This is going to be better than the Avengers. This is going to be better than Batman. Let's go. And then I didn't write a thing. Like I sat, like I would sit at like a bar in front of my laptop, and write nothing. And like the bartender would come over and be like, "Are you all right?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, sorry, just like writer's block, I guess." So even just like setting specific writing goals early on to get 20 minutes done, make sure a character does this, make sure this is the next thing and to happen. So when it finally comes to fruition, it is really special. And I might liken it to your 100th episode, which is great. Your 150th episode with John that I listened to the minute it came out. It was great. But then, dude, I'll take another lesson from you. This might turn into a how much we love each
I
other
mean, it
podcast,
might,
which is
just for
fine.
your listeners out
Which
there,
is
just this is what's
which is fine.
coming.
I really respect that you did your 150th podcast. I think it came out on a Friday. And then that Monday, you had a podcast out with a young man who was a lacrosse player, I think. And I just love that you were right back to work.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to take that moment to celebrate. But then we always think like, everybody's heard this, but you know what Tom Brady's favorite Super Bowl ring is? The
Next
next
one.
one.
Right.
Because he's got that great mentality of just like of he's obsessed with the process, and not the result, but by being obsessed with the process, you get the result. So the first day, I'll tell you to answer your question, the first day when the box showed up, honestly, I have to admit I was a little worried. I do a lot of writing at work, and my rule is no typos. Everybody at work knows if they find something that I submitted as a final draft that has a typo in it, it's Starbucks on me. It's coffee on me because you will not find a typo from something that I hand in that's final. So I got the boxes that finally came. I tore it open, grabbed a copy, and just read through it and just made sure that everything was lined up correctly, made sure because if I ordered 500 copies, if 500 copies showed up and one of the pages was upside down,
Mhm.
I'm kind of screwed,
Right.
like
Right.
it's kind of screwed. Like, so that would be like a crushing loss,
Was that the biggest
like,
fear? Like the night before you knew it was coming, was there something that you were like, I hope this doesn't happen, or I hope this doesn't look a certain like, was there anything that crossed your mind like that?
there was, but I kind of decided, I made so many decisions, just so many deals with myself, like
Yeah.
throughout this process, which I think is really important. I just decided that I would never go worst case scenario, and I
Yeah.
just like throughout the process, I just said, I waited this long, I can wait a little bit more. The only important thing here is, and the only important thing here is that I hold my comic book in my hands. The one really special moment where where I had to like go and collect myself was the first time I saw it on a shelf, where I put the comic on a shelf in a comic book shop. And I was like, I'm a tiny, tiny part of this thing that I've loved since I was a kid, and there's going to be some kid that walks into this comic book shop and my comic book will be there, and that to see it on a shelf for the first time, I was like, that's where Spider-Man goes. That's where the X-Men go. Like that, all these things that I've loved my whole life.
Right.
That was a really special moment to like fulfill that. Um, but I will, dude. I made a point too, and because I think you set a great example with this kind of stuff. When it came out, I made a big Instagram post, sort of bragging to myself a little bit, which I think
Hell
is
yeah,
okay
dude. You have
every
to.
now and then. Which I think is okay every now and then. I mailed some copies out, to some people who I had kind of worked with along the way, and then I made a point to hit the laptop. I made a point a couple days later to get and write something, just to kind of remind myself, like, hey, this is what got you there. This is what got you to this first step. This is what's going to get you to the next step. So I made a
Yeah.
point to get back to that process of hitting the laptop and writing some stuff down. They were just kind of like general ideas, but it was just so important to me to be like, this is what a writer would do,
Yeah.
is get back to work.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important trait, right? Because I think there's moments you enjoy, like our 100th episode, we enjoyed it a little bit, because
Yeah.
when you look back at certain things, like you kind of said this at the top, like I didn't enjoy the 50th because I just kind of was like, yeah, it's only 50. You know what I mean? I think that's
Yeah. And I think it's
part
good to
of
be humble.
Yeah, so 100, I enjoyed it, right? 100, I was
Yeah,
like, I'm gonna enjoy this. But you're right, 150, I was kind of like right back to work. Like I taped that episode the next day. Um I think that that's just an important part of like success. It's kind of like, what are those little, like I said, what are you doing with those extra minutes they have by yourself? Or what are you doing when like nobody else is paying attention? Like when the illustrator's doing this, or the person who puts the letters here is doing
yeah,
this, or
yeah,
whatever's going on. What is it that you could possibly do
yeah,
to, once this person gets done and this person gets done and this person gets done, what is already set now to, like, instead of being like, okay, now let's do this, what's something that we could have done? Okay, now we're all the way on this step. Like we're way ahead. Like I was able to get a couple other things done while
yeah,
other people were working. And I think that that's the difference in a lot of this stuff. Like I know a lot of people have done podcasts, and I know a lot of people that pursue passions, and it's hard to stick with it once you hit like an achievable point. Like it's
yeah.
hard to then
It
keep
is.
going. And
Yeah,
I think it's really important to understand that that is not easy, and does take people that push themselves a little bit to kind of just keep going. So I think that was great message that you brought across. But also talking about in this process, I do want to ask you a few questions as a fan, and we've never
sure.
talked about this. So this is kind of um the guy at the beginning who kind of brought them into this mission. What
Yeah.
was the motivation? Like, was there a certain type of person you thought, or a certain type of person character that you had in mind as far as what that person should look like? Because they seem pretty like clean cut, rich,
Yeah.
sort of type person by look. Was there a motivation behind that, or no, you just kind of create a character?
Not really. I just sort of created. I sort of created a character. I will say, should this storyline continue on, we'll find out a lot more
Mhm.
about the first character we meet in Runes.
Yep.
And I also, it was important to me to set up. It's always important for characters to have motivation. And I think that in stories, movies, plays that I love, I think that any single one can be boiled down to you need to prove the main character is trying to prove to themselves they're not a loser. The main character is trying to prove to themselves they can do it. They can do what everybody says they can't do. I think that's Hamlet. I think that's Batman. I think that's Inception. If I
Yeah.
were, still in college, I'd be writing a thesis on that. But I'm not quite there yet with my characters in issue one. So, in terms of that depth.
Right, but
So I
you
wanted
left the door so wide open. You're so right.
I
You
hope
left it
so.
so wide
Yeah,
open.
yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, yeah. But at the moment, so my main motivation for the kind of main villain that you meet in the first page of Runes is a tech billionaire, a billionaire, and I wanted the two characters to be initially motivated by money because I think that's a very strong motivation.
What
It
else
is
better?
for me. Yep, it is. It is for me. Hey, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense,
Yeah.
as I say sometimes. So I just wanted to have that kind of mysterious feeling, but also have that like billionaire feel, so that he could help out the main characters, and then the story unfolds, kind of as it does. No, I don't want to give any spoilers here in this podcast. You'll have to buy a copy of Runes to find out what
Absolutely.
happens. To find out what happens, but I think that I'm very interested in that initial motivation of something very superficial. That's
Mhm.
where the money part of it came in. And then ultimately the two main characters decide, can we trust each other? Can we believe in each other? And can we believe in each other to get us out to get us out of this, to get us out of the, to get us out of this danger. And that's what's really interesting to me is if people can, when people show that, if people are able to take a step back and show that humility and say, you don't make the same choices that I would make, but the choices you do make save the day,
Yeah.
and that's great. Like
I
that's
like that.
very, very interesting to me with characters.
I like that. I like that saying a lot. Um, Almost like he gave me the vibe of this like almost like Inspector Gadget villain type guy. You know what I
Oh
mean?
my
Like he
gosh,
was just kind of missing
Dr.
the
Claw,
cat a little bit.
Dr.
Yeah,
Claw.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
man, dude, he might if he shows up with a cat in issue number two,
I
it's
mean,
credit to you.
I know
That's
that's a
spot
tip that
on.
they have to be on podcast for sure. for sure.
That is spot on. But I think I love that idea. But yeah, I think that too. Where else does a cat show up as a villain? James Bond too. I think that too. As hard as I tried to make it original, and when I finally came down with a script, I spent a couple of days googling this kind of stuff just to pressure test to make sure there was nothing like this I could find that was out there. You know, people who
Mhm.
have seen it, like people in comic book stores who have seen it, like, oh, it's like Hellboy. Oh, it's like Ghostbusters. It's got that kind of feeling to it. And sure, there's so much great stuff out there. I was actually really honored when they said it's like Hellboy. I'm like, Hellboy has sold a million comic books. I would love to
Yeah,
be 1/100th as successful as Hellboy. But what you pointed out, Anthony, I think is something great, that there are these kind of themes and kind of tropes. That makes it. If somebody shows up in the first page and they have an eye patch, you're like, this is a bad guy.
yeah,
Like there are certain things, and that's where I think, in terms of relying on your creative team, that's where I think my colorists did a really good job to make
very
sure
good.
that, like, when you saw this guy, okay, this guy's a bad guy, and then we're kind of back to regular and the main characters, and then you kind of see these people, and something's up with them.
Right.
That's where you can really rely on your creative team to add in those levels, to add in those layers, and then you
Yeah.
kind of think to yourself, oh, this feels like a villain I've seen before. You know?
Now let me ask you this, and this is another question I had. At the part where they drove over the bridge,
Sure.
and you allude to them hearing the bridge crack, was
Yeah,
that a setup for then what
it
kinda
was.
happens on the bridge? Cool.
Yep.
Great setup. That was
If
a
you
great setup.
go, yeah, for the readers out there, just there's and then if you look at that page too, there's another panel on that page that I'll just this must be great podcasting to talk about visual stuff that people are just hearing and they can't see. This is good pod right here, but hopefully people will come out and grab a copy. But there's a lot of foreshadowing there, and then the panel right after that is set in silhouette, is set in all black, because I said to my artist early on and colorist early on that I need the reader to know early on that this is different, that something, that this spot is going to be dark and dangerous. And my artist and colorist did an excellent job just making it look different than the other panels. And so, from my job as a writer, is, am I setting things up plot wise? And then am I giving my creative team enough stuff in the manuscript for them to make it, for them to pull through the foreshadowing with the coloring and the sense of the panel. And I think they did a great job. I was thrilled with how that panel came out.
Yeah, I mean, that's great, the small little detail I'll go back now and kinda take a look at and now that I hear what your likes are and what certain things that kinda happen, it's gonna be interesting to go through for a 4th time and now pay attention to that stuff a little bit more. My last question, and maybe just kinda goes into just a bigger overall question is, we talked a few times and mentioned that you leave the door open. You leave the door open.
Mm, mm,
What's next for you? I know we're going to talk about your event in a minute, but what's next
okay.
from you as far as the creative side goes? Is there a thoughts
Yeah.
of Runes 2? Are you looking to be a series, or is this a one and done for you? Or is this, maybe you're going to kind of jump into a different storyline? Like, is there a creative next for you that you're kind of thinking about right now?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hope this keeps going. I was so happy with how the first issue came out. At the moment, I see the kind of chapter one of Runes as 6 issues. I
Okay.
have, that plotted out with what I want to do, and for those 6 issues and how I want to wrap it up. And I have number two and number three already written. And so those are kind of the next steps. You'll find out more about, like, the characters and, like, the world, the world that they live in
So you're like Back to
as the
the
story
Future.
goes
You
on.
wrote 2 and 3 together. 2 and 3 are filmed at the same time, like 2 and 3. So you kinda
I
know.
did I did not know that. 2 and 3
Yeah,
were
that's a
filmed at the same
fact.
time
That's
as
a
Back to the
fact that
Future?
2 and 3 were
Wow.
filmed within, like, a year and a half, 2 years of each other. Yeah, 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 like,
Wow.
I think as soon as 2 stopped,
Crazy.
3 started getting recorded, and there was, like, a delay for whatever scheduling, and then, yeah, it was like they were done back to back, like, fairly quick. Yeah.
Yeah, but that goes back to just, our discussion earlier of, like, what's in your control, what can you be working on, when you're at a kind of challenging part of the process. That's when I wrote these.
Mhm.
I said to when I was waiting for high res production files, when I was waiting for 300 DPI production files, you have to learn like a million pieces of terminology that you might never use again when you print something on your own. But when I was waiting for that, I was like, I do have heart for the story. I feel like it does have like kind of a clear next step. So I wrote 2 and 3 in that time. So I see this. So runes, I see chapter, the kind of whole chapter one as a 6 issue thing. I would love to get all 6 issues out there and published, and hopefully collected in a nice collection, in a trade paperback or a nice hardcover someday with all 6 issues in one place, so you can get the full story of our main characters and our main villain, kind of start to finish. And that to me is like that to me would be like a great story. So that's for runes. And then separately, I was just emailing this week with the colorist for a separate sci-fi series that I'm doing, where I took a totally different approach, which I do not recommend to anyone who wants to be writing and reading this. Is I wrote the whole thing soup to nuts. I wrote the
Wow.
whole thing in prose, like a short story, and then I wrote the whole thing like a manuscript, and consulted a few different people on it, and they were like, "Steve, this is great. Like, good for you. This is insane. Like, you have a 130-page manuscript. Like, no one's gonna draw it. Like, like somebody will die drawing this. Like, you have to." So I made that into like a sample, into a standard 24-page comic book, and that is in the coloring stage right now, and that's kind of a separate story now. So I'm trying to keep that mentality of, you know, what's your favorite Super Bowl ring, the next one.
Like you said,
And,
yeah.
I'm just trying to stay humble in terms of like what I kept telling myself throughout the process of publishing this first one is I am somebody who makes comic books. And didn't, if I wasn't somebody who made comic books, this is when I would quit. This is when I would get frustrated enough to stop. But I'm not. I'm not going to do that. Because I am somebody who makes comic books, so I stick it out through to the end. So I'm trying to keep that sense of humility, and just trying to keep that sense of keeping your nose to the grindstone and just keep making the next one.
I love it, man. I love it. I really do. Where can we find this bad boy? Where is this like located now for the people out there? Runes. I'm holding a copy up for those that are watching, but those that are
Yeah, thanks,
listening, I
man.
have it in front of the screen. You can see I have it in the plastic. I plan on keeping this in mint condition because when it
Great.
gets big and he gets big, I have the first ever. I have the first ever. Well, probably the second. Second. He probably has the first, but
I
I
think
have
it's
one
the
of the
first, man. I think
first.
it's the first one out of the box.
I
Yeah, I
think it
think it
was
was.
out of the box. But where can we purchase these? Where can we find these? Let the audience know.
Yeah, should we pitch the event now
Yeah,
too?
let's do it all together. Let's pop it all
Okay.
together here. Steve has a
Yeah.
huge event
So
coming up for Runes. We're gonna be a part of it. Steve, fire away, man. Let us know what's going on.
yeah. So, well, the one thing that people want to, and I really appreciate you, pushing it. But the one thing that is tough, especially when you're publishing something on your own, is I really don't have a distribution model right now.
Yeah.
I was wearing a lot of hats during the production of it, and then getting it out there and getting it out there and like available, to even like to send to people is just more than is biting off more than I can chew at the moment. But it's in some Boston area comic book shops at the moment. Those shops are listed on my Instagram account. If anyone wants to take a look at that and
Okay.
stop by and not only see some cool comics, but support some local small independent businesses. And then on Sunday, August 25th, one of my favorite comic shops in like the entire state, which is a really great shop, a shop I've been going to for years and years. Kamikaze in Davis Square is hosting me, as they were kind enough to host me at a creator pop up. So they're
Cool.
giving me part of their store. They're giving me a table at their store, and I'm going to be there Sunday, August 25th from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. selling runes. I have some merch coming in, and I will have both a hard copy and some digital stuff of a big preview of issues 1 and 2. I
Cool.
got in touch with a local. Oh, sorry, I got in touch with a Long Island-based artist and Ian Cinco. Shout out to Ian Cinco who published his own comic book, and he made for me a huge pinup, and everything in the pinup is a preview of one of issues 2 and 3 of things to come. So if you come by the shop, you can get the on August 25th. You can get the comic, you can get some merch, and you can see what's coming next because we got a lot of stuff planned.
That's great. Man, I'm so happy for you. It's awesome. We're gonna be
Yeah,
there,
thanks.
kind of catching it all for you, videos, pictures. Get out there, be a part of it. We're pumping it on our, our Instagram account over the next week or so, and yeah, get out there. I know Steve's gonna have a lot of people there. Steve's, a lot of people love him, so they're happy to support, and we'll be there to happy to support as well. And it's cool. Your first event is just cool. I mean, this guy's no stranger to that. He was also a comedian, and he was a great one in both New York and Boston, and wrote his own comic show, one man comic show, and performed. And so he's no stranger to this stuff as far as planning an event. And Steve planned the event that is down to the detail. So we're really excited about that and being a part of that. And last but not least, man, I really want to thank you for coming on here today and being a part of this. I love hearing the successes of people and I love showing people off. And we didn't conversate much before this, and I kind of did that to a
Yeah,
point because we wanted this to be more of a genuine conversation, a real conversation than anything else. So, I am very proud of you. I'm very happy. I think what you're doing and goal pursuing and now continuing that, getting a taste of it, dude, and just like wanting more. Like I get it. Like I get it. And I'm really excited to see what's coming for you. I really am.
yeah. Thanks so much, Anthony. And to close out, to round out the podcast here, I want to sincerely apologize to all the local high school coaches who logged on to get a podcast about a local high school coach, and it's something completely different. And it's just comic books. It's just comic book stuff. So to all the varsity athletes out there who are logging on, I hope this was useful. I hope it was, but Anthony, in all sincerity, a big part of getting this done was seeing your dedication to the Beyond podcast and seeing you make it real. We talk so much in this interview about to fall in love with the process. That's what you've always done. You've always just pursued anything you're doing with such an unmistakable level of integrity that success is inevitable for and things that you set your mind to. I'm sure it doesn't feel that way. I'm sure it doesn't look that way, but absolutely
Yeah.
so many times throughout this process when I was frustrated or stalled or kept going, I said to myself, look what Anthony's done, because he stuck with it, because he pursued his passion, because he did it with his consistently high level of integrity. And and that just brings people towards you.
Yeah.
That just brings people in and brings people towards you. So you're setting an example for so many of us in the sports world, and as far away from the sports world as you could possibly get, which is the comic book world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, man, we're gonna be obviously you're gonna be welcome back on here. We're obviously when Runes 2 is out, dude, you're back on
Oh,
here
sure.
because like you said, it's easy to kind of do it the first time and get to that pinnacle. But then it's
Yeah.
like kind of what are you doing after that? That
Yeah.
is kind of like, and you utilize your time well. So this was great. I really appreciate it. Guys, we have a lot coming up this week ourselves. Thursday is our best Hot Fudge Sunday in Massachusetts contest. We are excited. Our six places is set. We'll be driving all around the state and crowning our first ever champion. And we want to give a special shout out to the Mass Pirates, the indoor football team. We've been covering them all year in the IFL. Very talented team, offensively and defensively. You knew it was inevitable that they were going to be there at the end of the season. And here they are in the championship game. Ironically, I think against the team they actually won in the championship against in 2021 as well. So kind of a rematch in that sense of championship and good luck to them in Vegas. They're gonna have a blast and bring another championship home to Massachusetts, title town, where it belongs. So we have a lot going on, but we want to thank Steve for taking time to pop on with us. I'm your host, Anthony Petrellis. Till next time.